And in 30 seconds time she said, I want to live like commons people. I want to do whatever commons people do. I want to work with the commons people. I want to work with the commons people like you. Well, what else could I do? I said, I'll see what I can do. Hello and welcome to Commons People, a politics podcast which doesn't have a red briefcase either. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Rob. How are you doing, Rob?
Yeah, I'm very well, Tom. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. It's nice to be recording a day early because it means I have Friday off.
Yeah, it sounds lovely. I'm looking forward to the weekend as well.
Cool. So we're going to go straight into headline quickfire, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So our first one from City AM. Khan warns of London brain drain.
Yeah, so this is Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, talking about the housing crisis that's going on all across Britain, but particularly in London. He's saying that people who are living in London, young people, can't afford to buy houses there, and that means that they're afraid that they may lose the best talent to other cities on the rise, such as Manchester and Bristol, who can maybe provide a little bit more affordable housing for those young students who are coming up the ranks.
And I mean, I think people have heard the phrase brain drain already. I mean, I definitely know some people who have already left the UK over stuff to do with Brexit. Mostly people in academic fields who find it a bit easier to move around. But I mean, yeah, if it's hard to find a house, if it's hard to find somewhere to work, people will go where they can, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think they said in this article I'm reading that working in inner London, the average salary is about £34,900, which means if that's the average, that means that like sort of more than half are earning far below that. And I think if you're earning that a year, it would be very hard to save up the money, particularly if you're probably renting in the London market, which is expensive in itself, to even get a deposit to buy a house. I know you work in London at the moment, don't you?
I work about as centrally as it's possible to work, yes.
Yeah. But do you live in central London?
No, I live in Zone 6, and I'm very fortunate that I don't have to pay for my Oyster card. Otherwise, yeah, I would have had to get a higher paying job to make moving to London reasonable. So, yeah. I mean, but for reference, for people who are maybe living outside of London, I am paying now around double for my rent, sharing with 3 people, to when I was living in Manchester, living in a house. So I'm now living in a flat. It's a very nice flat, but I'm sharing with 2 of my friends who are a couple. And yeah, we're paying double each per month than I was paying in Manchester. So that's how expensive it is, even in Zone 6. So
it's just madness. So no wonder there's a brain drain. And as you mentioned, some of your friends who are moving away because of Brexit, we've had news today that Unilever, who've had their headquarters in London for the past 100 years, are going to relocate to the Netherlands. So that's another possible cause of brain drain, even though Khan was mainly focusing on housing. If Brexit goes ahead and London loses those economic ties, they might see an even bigger drain from the capital.
So our next headline, Britain's Master of the Universe.
So I think this is about the very sad passing of Stephen Hawking on Tuesday, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, yeah. Occasionally celebrities I like die, and that's sad. But I feel like, I accept it's sad as long as it's not a massive shock. I normally kind of go, oh, they've had their innings. And to be fair, with Stephen Hawking, he outlived his prognosis by 47 years, which is amazing and impressive. And but as a physicist and someone who grew up, finding him inspiring in a lot of ways, along with other famous scientists, I did feel it in a way that I didn't feel like I've ever felt a celebrity death in, well, maybe not ever, but for a long time. So it was kind of I came into work and people were like, oh, do you feel sad today? And I think a lot of people did. And he touched people, it's not just those of us who studied science. There's a lot of people appreciated what he did for science outreach as well as his achievements, obviously.
Oh, certainly. Like, I'm not in science at all, and I wouldn't be able to name you many more scientists, but Stephen Hawking was the man. He's been in loads of sort of pop culture. There were lots of stories that were coming out this week about different TV programs he'd appeared in. He'd appeared in The Simpsons and he appeared in Star Trek. And there was a lovely story about him on set with a warp core and just sort of deadpan going up to it and saying, "I'm working on that."
Yeah.
The whole crew bursting out laughing.
I believe he is the only person to ever cameo as themselves in a Star Trek show, which shows you kind of how important he was, that people thought, I'm sure people will still be talking about his contributions in hundreds of years of time. So
yeah, and he appeared on. I don't mean to sound crass when I say this. He appeared on shows like The Simpsons and Futurama, and they wanted him to appear personally to do his lines, even though they could have got a computer to do it. If you get what I mean, like he commanded that respect. People wanted to go and do it, and he wanted to share that love, his sense of humor, and just his love for life with the rest of the world. I think it was really brilliant. Yeah, and
one of the questions I did get asked by one of my colleagues was, what's your opinion of him as someone who studied science? And I was like, wondering basically if more of it was media presence than actual research. And I was like, well, he was a fellow of the Royal Society at 32, Lucasian chair of mathematics at Cambridge at 37, and I think frankly that speaks for itself. But some of his, you can actually download his thesis. When Cambridge University put it up online, it crashed their servers because of the unprecedented demand to download someone's thesis. I mean, to be fair, a lot of theses aren't publicly accessible in that way. You normally need at least some kind of university account, but even then, I doubt anyone's ever downloaded mine. So
an incredible man.
Yeah, definitely. Our next story is Tories break May's vow to ban Russian donors.
Okay, so this one's going to be a bit of a longer one, I'm afraid.
Maybe should I do the two headlines that are linked?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the next headline, also, this is all in a linked story here. May expels 23 diplomats in Russian spy network, which is from The Independent. And then I also put in brackets there some of the other headlines we're getting from some of the other papers. So I think it was, I can't remember which one it was now, but there's Putin's spy game, Cold War 2, which I think was the Mail.
Yeah, so this is the news that's been dominating the UK news cycle for about the past 2 weeks, really. So the facts, to briefly go over those, the weekend before last, a nerve agent was used on a former Russian spy and his daughter in Salisbury, and they now remain in a critical condition in hospital. Police were unsure of which substance was used. It was a bit of a mystery what substance was used at the time, and it was later found out after a couple of days it was likely to be Novichok, which is a Russian nerve agent that's believed to have been developed by Russia while their chemical weapons program was essentially meant to be shut down. So that's why it took so long to identify what it was, because it wasn't on any chemical weapons list. We had to use our own internal contacts to sort of find out what that was. And essentially, although we have no official confirmation of this yet, all signs point towards Russia having murdered an ex-spy on our soil. And it sparked a massive diplomatic incident.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that it has now. It's been found out. I think, am I right in saying that still at this point Russia's not admitting any fault? But we've now got to the point where it's not just us disavowing it. We have the US, we have Germany and France kind of signing a joint letter, mention of people going against international law, things like that. So it's definitely heating up. I don't think it's quite the eve of war that some people might be trying to tell you it is, but it definitely feels very Cold War. Here we are with a Republican president, a Tory government, and I feel like we might be repeating the 80s again.
Yeah, it is weird. I think it's when those Cold War fears are really about what can we do, what diplomatic things can we put in place to put pressure on Russia to make sure that they don't do this again. What can you do against a nuclear power without upsetting them too much, but still making sure that your force is known? Russia's done a lot of things in recent years. You could look to the invasion of the Crimea and the response from the West there, where Russia doesn't seem to have cared very much about that and the situation on the ground in Crimea is that Russia owns that now. So Russia doesn't care about what sanctions we do. So that's why we're playing this sort of diplomatic tit for tat as we see what sanctions we'll impose on Russia on what they'll do back to us.
Yeah.
I think certainly at the moment we've expelled diplomats, and Russia have said that they'll expel our diplomats, which means that there's a bigger opportunity for miscommunication between the two sides. So again, tensions are rising, but we don't know where it's going to go yet.
And the last time we expelled diplomats from Russia was when Litvinenko was poisoned, correct?
Yeah, and that was back in 2006. So that is quite a similar situation. It's got shades of that, except I think this time, Russia and their power has been in the news a lot more in the past couple of years. I've mentioned Ukraine. They've also sort of all been over the news in the US about their soft power, their ability to influence elections. They may have even had an influence on the Brexit vote. There's sort of suggestions that was something that certainly Russia wanted to try and destabilise the European Union, which would have been a block against Russia. So all of this just raises tensions once more into a situation that was already bubbling up.
And a related headline, we have Corbyn, the Kremlin stooge from the Daily Mail. What's that all about?
So Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May were discussing the Russian event in Parliament. And
this
Corbyn
is at PMQs, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was at PMQs. And he said that he thinks that there may have been a situation where Russia had lost control of their military-grade nerve agent, and Labour have repeatedly highlighted the dangers of mafia-like groups and oligarchic interests in London and their links with elements of the Russian state, and we need to take more firm action on that. So that was his statement, and what he sort of meant by that, and what people within his own party and outside saw, was him trying to score maybe a political point against the Conservative Party, suggesting that they were funded by Russian donors and oligarchs. And also, the second thing there was he was kind of suggesting that maybe it wasn't officially a Russian state-authorised action. It may have been a rogue agent.
Yeah.
Quite a lot within the Labour Party itself think that, no, it's quite clearly a Russian action. And for him to try and do this to score political points weakens his sort of credibility to be Prime Minister, his patriotism. It questions a lot of things that voters might take into account in the next general election.
But how has that got spun into the idea that he's a Kremlin stooge? You know, if he's trying to score points, yes, but he's asking a reasonable question of the government. How does that get spun that way? So his mere suggestion that, hey, it might not be Russia, that's the same line that Russia itself is trying to spin at the moment. Right, okay, I see.
So the noises coming out of the Kremlin are saying that, hey, you can't prove anything. We want an independent international investigation into this. We might have lost some of our nerve agent. If Corbyn looks to support that statement, he looks to be supporting Russia in the Kremlin's view of events.
Right, okay. Yeah, because I mean, my takeaway from that statement was not that he's supporting Russia, more that he's insinuating, as you say, that it's a problem with kind of the setup we have at the moment, where we have a lot of these oligarchs buying up property and stuff. It all kind of ties back in together with problems that are going on.
Yeah. And it's not a unique tactic from Corbyn. Corbyn, like during the Iraq War, which is one of the things that his supporters really love about him, that he stood up against the Iraq War, is that Corbyn said we should have never have gone to war. Independent international inquiry and time to reflect on the events and think sensibly and rationally about these things before we went into war. So that's his approach to international politics, is quite calm and restrained and waiting till we get all the facts. However, in this situation, a lot of people say that would actually be playing into Russia's hands, and the longer that we stall on this issue, the more it gives Russia power. So really, we should be uniting as a parliament in a country to be strong against the Russian government, rather than weakening to what the Russian story is.
Right, okay. I think I get now what was happening, because the problem is when you see these kind of headlines that are suddenly attacking, and you've read like that one quote, it's not clear necessarily. I think it's probably a good thing to pick up on because, I mean, it seems like all of the right-wing papers are just like somehow trying to imply he's a communist again.
Yeah.
Which, I know is a thing they do regularly, but it just seems like there was a lot of noise on that from maybe a few comments.
It feeds into that, and I think to my response to that would be, you've always got to look at the other side. You know what the Daily Mail's stance is. You know it's probably not going to agree with what Jeremy Corbyn says. However, people within his own party and his own shadow defence secretary, Niall Griffin, has come out since Corbyn made that statement and said that it was quite clear that due to the nature of the chemical weapons used, it had been the act of an aggressor, and essentially implying that the Russian state was that aggressor. I know a lot of Labour MPs have also come out and signed a document saying, we think it was definitely Russia. We don't want you to think that we agree with our leader on this point. So if you've got it coming from both sides, it gives more credence, or some credence to the opinion that I think Kremlin stooge is quite harsh. I think it's hyperbolic. I think it's the Daily Mail the Daily Mail has typically crossed that line where they're trying to paint Corbyn in a certain light. But it certainly didn't look good for Jeremy Corbyn. I know that a recent poll today where they asked voters, who do you think has a better handle on the Russia situation, Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn? 68% said Theresa May, and only 18% said Jeremy Corbyn.
So where's the other
There would be a don't know.
Yeah. So, okay, don't know. I was going to say, I don't remember what the Lib Dem statement was on this.
No, I don't know if they had one. But, yeah.
No, yeah, I was just checking. Checking I hadn't missed that anyway. Right, and our final headline, which once again brings us into our main story for the week.
Go ahead.
Hammond proclaims turning point for the economy, and this is from the Financial Times.
We had the spring statement this week as well. I know it's all very exciting. Everybody's been crossing off the days on their calendar before we get to hear the Chancellor speak. So traditionally, by former Conservative governments, this has been presented as a budget. Somebody would come out, George Osborne would come out with a big red briefcase and say, I'm setting a budget. This was not one of those. It was just a statement on how the economy is doing and what we might maybe plan to do in the future. And we come up.
And that's because we've rejigged how we do budgets and statements, right? That was the last time we had the budget brought forward, and therefore we're now kind of in a different cycle.
Yes, I believe so. We kept having emergency budgets when we had a very bad economy, and we kept having to rejig things every couple of months to keep the economy going. Now things have calmed down, as the headline suggests, turning of a corner, a turning point for the economy, and things seem to have stabilised.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually had the opportunity to watch most of this, and I got the impression. So I saw most of Hammond's speech during my lunch break, and then I saw some of the Shadow Chancellor John Mcdonald's response. And I mean, there's always a lot of bluster in Parliament, back and forth, people booing and stuff like that. The Speaker has to get up and shush everyone, but I feel like there's not really much to it. Really, it's not because it's not a budget. It feels like there's a lot less going on. It's kind of just here's some facts. And then there was a few things, but then I suppose it's more talking about what he didn't do.
Yeah, certainly. And as in with any budget, or I know this is the budget, it's a statement, there's always things that both sides can pick holes in. You can make anything you want out of facts, really, to help support your own arguments. So should we go through some of these points one by one?
Big headline here, I suppose. Growth revised up from 1.4 to 1.5. Is that percent?
Yes.
Yes.
So I know 0.1% doesn't sound all that much, and it certainly wasn't as big as some people were thinking before the statement was going to be announced. But it at least showed that Theresa May's party have got the economy back on track. The economy is continuing to grow and defy predictions that the economy would suffer as a result of the Brexit and will continue to sort of stagnate. The fact that there's that 1.5 figure that sort of defied what most economists were predicting was going to happen in this spring statement shows that the government feels that we're on the right track to recovery, and that can only be a good thing.
And then we've got as our minus point, it's not as big as the pre-Brexit result levels. So is that an expectation it's not as high as?
Yeah, so when we were looking back at economic forecasts back in 2015, before we knew that we were leaving the European Union, the government was expecting growth to be at least 3 to 4% a year.
Right.
It's not, you might look at the Conservative government now with Theresa May in charge and say, well, she didn't ask for the referendum. She's just the person who was put in charge to deal with the results. So any Brexiteers who are saying, oh, this is fantastic, the 1.5% shows that we are defying the odds and the economy can grow, just be reminded that before the result, we were expected almost double the growth that we were. So it might not be that big a success for the government, those growth figures.
But maybe a sign that given a bad hand by the previous Prime Minister and the outcome of the vote, that they're doing all right.
Yes, certainly.
So another pro point for the government, inflation is down.
Yeah, so this means that your cost of living should feel cheaper, essentially. It's always a good thing for the average Joe on the street to have inflation kept under control. It means that you can afford more food, fuel, the basics.
Am I right in thinking that I don't know if this is also for the growth index as well, but they've changed some of the products they use to track all of this, because we have two methods of tracking, right? One is related to the consumer price index, and we have another index that I can never remember the name of.
Yes, that's right. But you're right. There's one that's sort of based on a standard shopping basket of things, and it's always news when something gets put in on the shopping basket or taken out. So in previous years, they've sort of put a smartphone on that list because that's something that everybody's expected to have, or they might put a tablet in there and take out a home phone.
And so they try and have like a few things from each category, and it adds up. Is it 100 products total?
I think so. I'd have to check that.
Okay. Well, we can put a link in. There's definitely a BBC article covering the changes there. I think it was a cot or some kind of baby stroller got put in, so there's a new baby product. And that was apparently big news, and then overshadowed by Russia. But
yeah.
And then he put his minus point there that it's that's good, but we're still feeling the squeeze of our higher living costs.
Yeah, so I think they can say inflation's down as much as possible, but I think if you're looking at the economy over a very long, people have experienced their wages being able to bring less and less home. And I know certainly for me, somebody who drives to work every day, the cost of petrol is still high, and that's a big chunk of my income coming out. So it's good that inflation is on the way down, but it might not be such a significant change that people will feel it anytime soon. And
there's also been, in general, people's salaries have not been rising alongside inflation for the last few years because of all the knock-on effects of the recession and so on.
Yeah, certainly. I think that links in with another good point on the budget, that they say that wages are starting to rise faster than they have over any other period in recent years. But they're not quite raising it fast enough. We've had that historically, like you've mentioned, low level of wages. Particularly if you work in somewhere like the public sector, where there have been freezes on pay. I know that there's been a freeze on teacher pay. The NHS had to strike in order to try and get more pay themselves. That's one reason why universities are striking, because there's a freeze and changes to their pension plans. So there are definitely certain sections of the economy and society that are feeling the squeeze more than others.
So next pro point for the government, borrowing is down.
Yeah, this is one of the big points. If you were following David Cameron or George Osborne on Twitter, you might have seen them on one day suddenly say, fantastic, our job with the economy has been achieved. What happened is that we able to reduce borrowing, and finally the amount of taxes, the amount of money that we're getting in taxes is more than the government is spending overall.
So there's no longer a deficit on an annual basis, which means we're now paying off our debt.
Yes.
Yeah.
On top of that, borrowing is down. So that's a big sort of thumbs up. That was the Conservative plan when they got in 2010. And there was a note that they found in the Labour Chancellor's desk drawer that said, all the money's gone.
Yep.
Their point was to go, right, we've got to get spending under control so we can start building the economy back up. So for Conservatives, and if you're a Conservative supporter, that's a massive achievement to finally get to a point where you are effectively making money, or at least being able to pay back your debt in some way. And that's why that's linked to borrowing being down. We have to borrow less because we're now able to pay off more of our debt.
So the flip side here is, I mean, I've seen some headlines being like, oh, it's the end of austerity. And the thing with austerity is we've had, that means we've been cutting back on public spending in general, in order to achieve this. So the average person is now seeing less investment in local government services. And I think I saw one of the headlines from this week was something like 10 local councils about to go bankrupt or something. So that's kind of the flip side, is that that they've not been subsidizing these things in the way the previous government did.
Yeah, that is the price of austerity. In order to get your budget back on track, or to get that balance, you're going to have to cut goods and services for people. And I think we've seen that that's been quite unpopular with a large amount of the population, those changes. And usually, unfortunately, affects those who live in the poorest areas, who are not typically Conservative voters. They're usually Labour voters as well.
I mean, it's true to say, I think, that in general, Labour governments increase their spending, Conservative governments cut it back. And that's kind of the balance we have as we flip between the two main parties.
Yeah, totally. And it brings up the question, what do the public care about more? Does the public care about having a balance sheet, which isn't that quite like a sexy policy, something that, you can really hang your hat on and say, oh, fantastic, you've got nothing to show for it other than we're slowly getting the economy back on track. But if people are losing health services, local councils, the ability to, help their relatives through health crises, stuff like this, then that real human impact might have more influence on the general electorate next time they go to the polls.
Yeah. So it's a positive thing, but the average person isn't necessarily seeing why it's positive.
They're not seeing the benefit of it. It's a good thing to say, yes, it sounds perfectly sensible to have no deficit, but if it's at the cost of some of the things you've had to cut over the last 7 years, and you mentioned that some people thought it was an end to austerity, they're not going to suddenly go and spend big bucks. They're probably going to try and limit their spending so they can keep this in order. That's what they've had to do to achieve the balance. It's going to be interesting to see where the Chancellor goes from here, if he will increase spending in other areas.
Because, I mean, there was some talk of maybe some more funding for the NHS. I think there was another headline with Hammond behind it saying, I mean, I didn't get to read the article, so I don't know if it was him saying anything or if it was just speculation, but saying that there's more money for the NHS, which I think most people agree is a good thing at the moment, because several years of crisis for the NHS with limited funds.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the government's line on that is always that they've been investing record amounts into the NHS. The counterpoint to that is the NHS is bigger and more expensive than it's ever been, just because of that's how it is. There are more people in Britain, so you need more people to try and fund it. So it was always going to go up in cost. They might not have raised the funding enough to deal with the strain that's going on in the NHS. I think they will have to raise that in the next few years if they're going to keep it going.
Yeah, I think the point was as well, because in general, the Conservative Party is more aimed at the older demographic, retirees, and obviously a lot of them use the NHS if they don't have private healthcare. So it's kind of a vote winner on that side for them. They can be like, look, we're investing in your care. Yeah,
certainly. Your political parties will always try and appeal most to their core voters.
Yes.
The NHS is a key point, but it's a popular point across for all voters in the UK. I think the NHS is something that we're very proud of. It was in our Olympic opening ceremony. That's how proud of it we are, and we do want to maintain it. So any government who sort of promotes more spending in the NHS will be popular.
So we briefly mentioned that wages are starting to rise faster again. But I think we've got the flip side there, that we're not expecting them to return to pre-crash levels yet. In fact, into the 2020s, which is, still a few years away.
Yeah, it means that for at least 12 years, we've had wages that haven't been anything near what people were experiencing back in 2007, 2008, before the crash. That long lag time on the recovery of the economy shows that you've had a generation of people who've got into work in that time, who have been behind what the former generation would have been in terms of wages. So this is why you get cries of sort of like a lost generation or wasted years, a wasted decade.
Yeah. I mean, if we'd started working in the mid 2000s, we would have, at this point in our lives, be better off.
Oh yeah, certainly. Houses would have been cheaper. If that's one point, and wages would have been way above inflation. If you look back to those early 2000s and compare them today, there's a massive difference economically in the quality of life.
I mean, obviously it depends. I'd always rather live further into the future than not. But yeah, it's kind of it's a thing a lot of people in our generation are dealing with, that they're just not better. I think it's said we're the first generation to not be better off than our parents since the World War, but I don't know if that's strictly true. I don't know if the 80s was also quite. I think I know the 80s was quite bad for certain people, so I don't know how that works out when you average it out.
Yeah, and the 70s was certainly quite bad economically as well.
Yeah,
I think my point on that is my personal experience was I was doing my A levels around about 2005, 2006, and was told by my teachers that just go out, get a degree. If you get a degree, you can get any job you want because they're just looking for people to be qualified. It's brilliant out there. And so then I went into university in about 2007, 2008. The crash happened, and then when I came out the other side, my degree suddenly wasn't quite what I was sold. I had to really scrap around and look for jobs that I could get. You were thrust out into an economy that I wasn't prepared for when I was learning in 2004. So there's that generational difference. There's a big change there, and how you deal with it and prepare for it.
It's interesting, I think, as well, because as you say, it happened in 2007, 2008. I was at uni. It wasn't the only reason I did want to go and study for a PhD, but it was also kind of a deciding factor. I remember having that conversation, being like, it'd be nice to still be a student for 4 years and hopefully come out the other side where there's more jobs, and technically I'll also be better qualified.
Yeah.
And I mean, that gamble worked for me. I don't know if other people were going in with that same decision at the time. But, it affects how people think.
Yeah, it was scary going out into the world in 2010 when I completed my degree and thinking, are there going to be jobs out there for me to have? Am I coming out into a right market? I did okay for myself. I'm happy with what I did, but I know for a lot of people, a lot of my friends, that they struggle to get a job that used their degree. Well, you can't choose when you're born. You're just a victim.
There's also the EU divorce bill to kind of factor into our predictions and calculations going forward from this point.
Yeah, just a little point about that is that it was revealed that we'd be paying off the big figure that we've got for our EU divorce bill, which I think is around £50 billion. That's the amount that we're paying to leave the EU to pay off our remaining debts that we've got with them, and that we'll be paying it off until 2064. But the majority of that, sort of like a big chunk of it, the first 18 billion will be paid off in the first 4 years, which shows that the bill has kind of like a very long tail and certainly a very long economic consequence to it. And it's also a figure that nobody on the Leave side of the argument in the Brexit debate really argued that we'd be paying or say that we might have to pay. So to see all the very real impact of it now, it will be very interesting to see how the government factors that in with the rest of their calculations for the economy for the next 50 years plus.
And it's just as a number check I did there. That's 50 billion divided by 350 million is 142.9. So that's how many red buses, double-decker buses you can get for that money.
Brilliant. I think that should be an official scale. The 300 million bus scale. Everything should be ranked in the number of buses you can afford.
We're going to go off and talk about something we probably know a bit less about now. Over to the United States for discussion of the Tillerson firing by Donald Trump.
Yeah, so Rex Tillerson was Donald Trump's Secretary of State. Before that, he was the CEO of ExxonMobil, I think, the oil company. He was a little bit controversial when he was appointed Secretary of State. He'd had no previous political experience. But him and Donald Trump from the start didn't get on very well. And I think over the past year, that's why it's built up to a point where he's ended up leaving Donald Trump's employment. He's not the first one to leave in recent weeks. We've had one of his economic advisors leave because Trump has enforced steel tariffs. We've also had his communication secretary, Hope Hicks, resign. But Rex is certainly the most high-profile and most high-ranking to leave.
As pointed out on Reddit, that he lasted 40.5 mooches, a mooch being the unit that Scaramucci was in his post for. And people have decided that this should be renamed the Tillawatt so that we can shout 1.21 kilowatts. Great Scott! If someone lasts, about a year and a half. So, in fact, I think someone came up with a whole scale based on the various people do, a whole scale based on all the various different versions of the mooch that people have used.
Just yes, please. The 1.2 kilowatts are just yes, incredible. So one of the I've written down a couple of points where they disagreed and why probably it led to them having to break up, as it were. So there was some key policy issues where they differed. So you've got the Iran deal. Trump, all the way through his campaign, had said this deal that Obama had signed was awful with Iran. It was a bad deal for the USA. First thing he was going to do when he was in government was actually rip it up and renegotiate it. Rex Tillerson took a much more pragmatic view and said that they should keep it until we had a better deal to offer them. One of the requirements of the Iran deal that the former Congress had put on President Obama is every couple of months, Obama had to come out and say, I still agree with this deal, we should still go ahead with it. And Congress would vote on it. And the reason they did that was to try and embarrass Obama, get it mentioned in the news again, make sure people were reminded that Obama was responsible for this deal, because it was a Republican Congress that was in charge at the time. However, now they had Donald Trump in charge, it got a little bit embarrassing for them.
Yep.
Because Donald Trump didn't like this deal, but also the Republican Congress now really wanted to keep the deal because they knew they had nothing else to offer Iran. And if the deal broke down, then Iran might have a way of going back to their nuclear weapons program.
So to be clear, that the Iran deal is basically an agreement that they won't start a nuclear weapon program, but in response, the US gives them some trade benefits, or was it just reduction of previous sanctions?
I think it was a reduction of previous sanctions that had been put in place. So now that Trump was having to come out and say this is fine, that made Trump quite angry, particularly when it had been a campaign point. So if you've got a Secretary of State who likes it and Trump who disagrees, and Trump's kind of being reminded about this point every couple of months, it's going to lead to a breakdown in relations. The other point I got was that you've got the Paris Accord on climate change. Rex supported that as a businessman who thought it was sensible for long-term economic growth. Donald Trump was against it. He's a bit of a climate skeptic, as we know.
I find that interesting because Rex was previously Exxon, right?
Yeah.
He's not necessarily the person you'd assume would be for it. So it's kind of, it shows, sometimes people make these decisions with business decisions, but but that's not what would have jumped to mind when I first heard Rex Tillerson was coming in. Yeah, no,
I think they're both very different characters. Trump is the big, brash businessman. Tillerson is more of the softly spoken, very pragmatic businessman. That's how he rose to the top government department. They disagreed on that. Probably the biggest one, and the one that came up in the news most recently, is on North Korea.
Yeah, that's one. But my impression of this, right, was that one day it was like the US are going to have peace talks with North Korea because Trump says so, and then maybe like the day later, people are like, oh, maybe it's not quite so clear because Trump just says stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think that was like the Republican paper was like, whoa, step back a bit. All he said was yes, but like not officially. So it's not really clear what's going on yet.
Yeah. This potentially historic meeting with Kim was something where Trump was the only one to say yes. Everybody hasn't really agreed with it yet. Trump might see that as a victory of his diplomacy, feeling that his war of words, his sort of threats of fire and fury have helped to air North Korea to the negotiating table. Rex Tillerson often thought that Trump's words were careless, may have sparked an unnecessary conflict with North Korea. And also, there's a lot of people who think that having North Korea with the USA actually is more of a victory for North Korea than America. It means that you're putting North Korea on a par with the USA if they're treated as equals, and that would be a massive coup for Kim. Yeah, the wiseness of Donald Trump's foreign policy there is put into question, and I think if you've got a president who is constantly undermining your decisions and your point of view as Secretary of State, it's going to lead to a breakdown in the relationship.
Yeah, and how have they both kind of responded after? Well, I mean, how did Tillerson's last speech kind of go as he left the post?
It was weird. It was very very strange, very cold. I think one of the biggest points is that he didn't thank Trump at all. It was very businesslike. He just said the Russians have. Well, I think that the Russians poisoned this person in the UK. The USA should act to do something about that. Kind of. It was the Rex Tillerson show. Here's what Rex Tillerson's policy is. I'm not going to be able to enact it now. I liked being in public service. He felt that it was rewarding, but didn't thank Donald Trump for giving him that opportunity, and he left.
Yeah, so no love lost then.
No, certainly not between the two. I think the weirdest thing about the whole situation was that. So do you know that he fired him by a tweet?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I think I had heard that, but that could have been anything Trump had done this week.
Yeah. Rex Tillerson doesn't have Twitter, so an aide in the Secretary of State Department had to go to a computer, print out Donald Trump's tweet onto an A4 piece of paper, and pass that to Rex. I can't think of a more embarrassing way to receive your sort of notice that you're getting fired than a printed out tweet from the President of the United States.
And now our new regular feature, Political Would You Rather? So, Rob, are you going to explain this new feature to me?
So everybody's probably played a game of Would You Rather with your friends, just putting up random situations and saying, would you rather have fingers for tongues or a tongue as a finger, something stupid like that.
And of course, the famous Reddit question, would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck?
Yeah, I believe President Obama asked that at one point as well, on Between Two Ferns.
Oh, on Between Two Ferns, okay. I'll try and find that link for the show.
But yeah, so the point of this one is that I will ask you sort of a political would you rather, and you give me your opinion. It's probably a bit more serious than the average game, but you can always kind of logic your way out of the situations. So, first one I've got is, would you rather that Jacob Rees-Mogg or Gavin Williamson was the next leader of the Conservative Party?
So this is where I have to say I don't really know much about Gavin Williamson. I saw his name appear in the news. He has a CBE, apparently.
Yeah. Do you want me to fill you in on Gavin? He's a fascinating character.
Oh, he's a fireplace salesman from Stoke. Okay, yeah, you're gonna have to film.
Yeah, okay. So these two are probably like Jacob and Gavin are probably the most realistic figures at the moment to be next leader of the Conservative Party. Gavin used to be chief whip of the Conservative, so it's his job to tell MPs what to do. He owns a pet tarantula called Kronos that he used to keep on his desk when he was chief whip, and he used it to intimidate MPs to see which way they would vote in the Commons. He said that he wasn't fan of a carrot, but a stick-shaped carrot works quite well. So he's quite an intimidating figure, and he's certainly on the Theresa May side of the party. So yeah, at the moment he was chief whip until the Secretary of State of Defence position came up, and it's very rare that a whip gets promoted to that point. But essentially, what people assumed happened was that Theresa May had a conversation with her whip saying, "Who do you think I should appoint the Secretary of State?" And he said, "Well, I'm quite good," and he got himself the position. So that's a little history of Gavin. I think for Jacob, you know a little about him. You've probably seen enough of him.
I think I know enough to make an opinion now that I have some information about Gavin.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would definitely stick with Gavin based on what you said. I don't want the Conservatives getting further right, and I don't think I want Jacob Rees-Mogg's side of the party in charge of the Conservative Party. It's also, again, I suppose, a known factor. We know the kind of things Theresa May's government are doing, and if he's in that kind of school of thought, then it's not really a massive change. So I think that's probably the safer bet. I mean, I kind of did a similar thing when we had the election, is it 1922 Society?
Mm-hmm.
And when the Conservative Party were picking their leader and ended up with Theresa May, I mean, I had a strong opinion against most of them except Theresa May at the time. Yeah. I didn't necessarily approve of all her policies and a lot of the stuff she did as Home Secretary. But when I went through the others, there was like a clear no in each case. And I think Jacob Rees-Mogg has my clear no, which leaves Gavin.
Yeah, I think for all of Gavin's sort of Machiavellian qualities, I would still prefer him in charge to the possibility of Jacob's politics leading the country. Okay, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
This is for the Labour Party. Would you rather have John Mcdonald or Andy Burnham as the next leader of the Labour Party?
So, again, I know a bit about both of them. I believe, is Andy Burnham the one who ran against Corbyn previously?
Yes, and he's now Mayor of Manchester.
Yes, okay. I get the feeling. So John McDonald's Shadow Chancellor, right?
Yeah.
So I get the feeling, based on limited knowledge of both of them, like enough, but like without knowing their entire life histories, I get the feeling that John McDonald doesn't kind of feel like a leader. And Andy Burnham has clearly been voted in as Mayor of Manchester and was in a previous election race against Corbyn and did quite well, but didn't win. So I think, especially if I don't know how it would affect the party. So I think there is a possibility, right? If when Corbyn leaves, that because a lot of the people who came in with momentum and stuff like that were very Corbyn focused. I'm not 100% sure if the whole Labour Party would stay together. And there is a tendency for the left parties to split. I mean, that's how we got the Lib Dems. So out of those, who would be the better leader for keeping the party together? I don't know. I think the momentum lot would support John McDonald over Andy Burnham, but I think Burnham had quite a lot of support as well. So I think you might lose some of the newer converts to Labour if you had Andy Burnham, but I don't know I don't think picking either of them would destroy the party.
Yeah, but do you have a preference personally? Is there anyone there who you think sort of shines through?
I don't have a strong feeling either way, but I have a feeling like Andy Burnham seems like more of a leader, so it would be him out of the two.
I think that highlights a really good point about how, I think Jeremy Corbyn has shown time and time again that he's able to a very good, passionate base voting for him and supporting for him. The real problem Labour has is who their next leader is and who they can elect to get that momentum behind them.
Yeah,
I think Corbyn will almost have to nominate a successor rather than somebody else in the party putting themselves forward.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a speech by Andy, but I feel like, having seen John McDonnell talk, he doesn't really command that kind of presence. And I don't know if Labour has any equivalent person to Corbyn at the moment. But yeah, I think you need a bit of je ne sais quoi, to kind of get people on your side.
Yeah, I think we'll see. That'll be one that we'll have to see. If Corbyn ever wants to stop being leader of the Labour Party, I don't think he'll want to anytime soon. I think the Conservative question is, Theresa May, with all of her problems that she's had, it's not too far-fetched to think that we could have another Conservative Party leader by the end of this year. With Labour, I just don't see it happening. Our final question. So this is looking forward a bit. Would you rather be a Republican running against Donald Trump in their presidential primary, or would you rather be a Democratic candidate run against Trump in the presidential election in 2020?
I think it was this week that Pennsylvania had the equivalent of a by-election. They had an election, and this was a seat that was won by 20 points by Trump in 2016, has been previously a strongly Republican seat. It was just won by the Democrat, but that's quite a big turnaround. And they've got their full elections coming up at the end of this year, I think November 2018?
Yeah, the midterms.
I think it's already clear that there's a lot of activism coming from the Democrats, a lot of grassroots stuff going on in the US.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I think, I have a feeling like, unless Trump just decides he doesn't want to do it again, that he could probably still win the Republican primaries on the strength within the Republican Party of his supporters. But I think on the national level, the Democrats will probably win the next election based on how things seem to be going now. I mean, obviously everything could change in the next 2 years, but I think therefore I would pick being a Democrat running against Trump, because I feel like Trump would probably still get through that presidential primary and be in the final vote regardless if he runs against him. But then I think he's going to lose out to the Democrats, because I think enough people who are kind of in the middle are going to just go, no, we can't allow this again.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. I think Trump also showed that he was very good at running primary elections last time in 2016.
Yes.
He was a complete outsider when that began and was able to get a good core voters sort of like out of nowhere, and a lot of enthusiasm from within that Republican base. And we're still talking about this in American politics, that his base is still happy with what Trump's doing, even if the rest of the country isn't. He's got a solid 20-30% of people who seem to never waver from what Trump does and what he wants. So yeah, I put my money on Trump to win most presidential primaries within the Republican Party. But yeah, with the enthusiasm that's coming up for Democrats in 2020, fingers crossed. Might see some change in the White House.
I think we're both pro that change. So
yeah.
We're coming to the end of the show. With just one thing we want to touch on briefly is that we realised there is another political podcast that chose the brilliant name Commons People before we did. So we're thinking of changing the name. We've put out a call for name suggestions. You might have noticed we don't have a Twitter account yet. That's because once I realised this around the time of last recording, I decided it would be better to ask everyone and do a rebrand before I went and got a Twitter account, because most of the other things you can change the links for, change the names quite easily. So, so Commons People, quite a fun pun. I kind of don't want to lose the pulp logo, but I'll have to have a think. Let's have a look at what we had. Let's have a look at the responses we had from some of our listeners. So we had a suggestion from Jenny, who I think is one of your friends, of Polo Twits, which has quite a nice ring to it.
No, I am a twit as well, so it does help with that. Yeah,
I quite like it. It's quite a good play on words. I feel like I don't have the Photoshop chops to make us look like Roald Dahl's The Twits for the purposes of the logo, so that might be my only reason not to do that. We also had Sam suggesting a pun on PMQs. It's like pod ministers questions, and then immediately shot down his own idea. I think you suggested something similar that we also decided was a bad idea. You suggested TMQs for Tom's questions. It's because I suppose I do a bit more of the asking of the questions. I think
full of hot air.
I don't think that's. I think I can't think of a good pun on PMQs at the moment, so I think we'll have to leave that. Pole position, quite like that one. It's good. A mixture of a sports pun and a politics pun. It's F1, right? Where that's important.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy to make this podcast half about the F1 season that's about to kick off as well, but I know you might not be. Yeah,
I'm not particularly into sport in general, I'm afraid, so it might not be for me. And I think the one we're settling on is unparliamentary language, and we'll put a link in the show notes to the UK Parliament website link on unparliamentary language, which basically is when someone breaks the official rules of politeness in the House of Commons. It's quite a brilliant list here of words which the Speaker has taken objection to. Coward, git, gutter snipe, hooligan, rat, swine, stool pigeon, and traitor.
Can you call me a stool pigeon in the next episode? I mean, I don't know what it means, but I want to be called it.
I think that's quite a good name. It's interesting. There is another podcast that incorporates it in their name, but it's not their full name. And I don't think they're talking about politics directly. They're just kind of chatting about stuff. Are they an Irish podcast, I believe? I
think so. I at least did my due diligence this time and Googled the name I suggested before I put it forward. So.
But theirs is not quite the same, and I think we're fair in saying we'll be distinct as opposed to having exactly the same name as. Obviously, if someone comes up with a way better name before the next episode goes out, then we will switch to that. So answers on a postcard, or more accurately, on the comments section of our website, on the Reddit, which is r/commons people. Might have to make another Reddit, actually. That's a good point. And you can also find us on patreon.com/TTSS for Tinker Tailor Soldier Sponge, which is the overarching website I run all these podcasts off. And you can sign up there as a parliamentarian to support us. And if you back us at the $5 and above level, you get to come and listen to us talk every other week on a Friday evening on our Discord server. So that's there as an option for you, or you can just throw us $1 if you're happy that we exist and that the podcast is happening. So that's always good. And yeah, come and join the conversation. And it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from him. Bye.
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 Does that sound all right? Was that amusing? Yeah.
That
Cool.
sounds fun, yeah.
The Tillerson firing by David Trump. David Trump?
David.
Donald Trump.